Alright, hello. Should be going live now. Let me know how audio is. I do have air conditioner running. This room was getting up to like 92 degrees with these 3 TVs going the other day. So I would like to keep the air running as long as you guys don't hear it. Let me just double check that this is actually live. Alright, are we live? It says we're live, but on YouTube it's not showing. Unless it's that long of a delay. Alright, I think it's live now. So, if you can hear me, let me know. Let me know about the air conditioner if you hear any noise. And then we'll get rolling as soon as I get some confirmation here. Okay, yeah, so it looks like there's about a 40 to 45 second delay. So if you're commenting, keep that in mind. Not sure why it's so long. I put it on a faster delay, but I guess that didn't work. Alright, so you can see the room. There's, it's daytime, so there's light coming in behind the TVs. And then I have the lamp over there. That helps camera exposure. I think the game just kicked me out. So I do have 2 Xboxes set up. One's going to the G4 and the A95L because they both can be set to around 1500 nits. And then another one going to the Samsung, also because the G4 and A95L we can test Dolby Vision gaming. So let me get back into the same game. Alright, then we'll get going. So also, on top of doing a little bit of comparing here, I want to briefly talk about the Sony Bravia lineup. I see in the comments there's some talk about that. So, for one, let's get the naming right. So the Bravia 789 is not really their model names. Those are the lineup, or like the series, I guess you could call them. The actual model numbers are XR70, X80, XR90. So whenever I see someone typing in B9, I'm thinking a 2019 LG OLED. I'm sorry, that's just how it's going to be. The actual model numbers are XR70, XR80, XR90. So that, because if you think about it, if it was just Bravia 789, what are they going to do next year? So at least with the XR, then a couple numbers, they'll be able to increase the number next year. Get these both back over here where I had them. Do not judge anything about how they look at the moment. Right now, everything is literally straight out of the box, just default settings. So we're going to go through all the settings. Why does that look really choppy? I don't know. So right about there, okay. Yeah, so literally if you just set them up and put them in out of the box game mode, that's how they look in this game. This game has no HDR controls, so it's going to default to the 4000 nit tone curve on them. So we're going to mess with all of that in a moment. Back to the Sony Bravia models. Also, the Bravia 7 I've seen claimed as like the same as the X95L. I highly doubt that. I think it's more like the X95K, which was rebranded as the X93L. It's going to probably be a little bit brighter than the X95L, but that's because the 95L was designed to suppress brightness a little bit to have less blooming. So you can expect more blooming on the Bravia 7 XR70. And then the Bravia 9 or XR90, there's already been, someone somewhere has a couple of photos out there or video or whatever going out showing it's a bloomer as expected. Again, these are LCD TVs. They're going to have blooming. And people need to remember there's over 8 million pixels in a 4K display. So even if you have 2,000 zones, there's over 4,000 pixels in each zone. And if, say, 30 pixels need to be bright, but the rest of them need to be dark, that's going to be impossible no matter what they do. So no matter what, it's not going to be as accurate as an OLED. So again, if you want the best performance and the most accuracy, you have to go OLED. It's that simple. With an LCD with local dimming, they have to decide, do we increase the brightness of that zone for those however many pixels that need to be bright, or do we suppress that brightness to reduce blooming? It looks like with the XR90, they're going to lean more towards making it brighter, which, you know, some people will like, but it's going to have more blooming. So just keep that in mind. And then as far as the XR80, it's basically a refreshed A80L. From what I've seen, the power consumption rating is exactly the same at all sizes as the A80L, so I wouldn't even really expect a brightness increase, at least not one like the C4 got, even though it'll be the same panel. But we'll see about that one. Alright, so that out of the way. Yes, all these are just straight out of the box. Let's start going through the settings. One thing that we can definitely give Sony a bonus point for is they're the only one in game mode where you literally don't have to do anything. As we go through the settings, you're going to see that they're all in their accurate settings for game mode. No other TV company that I've seen actually does this. So it's in the correct color temperature, the luminance is right. They do have reality creation on 10, which, you know, whatever. That's a mild setting. We're just going to leave it as is. And they have smooth gradation on low, which is what I would recommend, actually, because that does help with posterization and when you look up at the skies and whatnot. And all the motion stuff's off. So with Sony, it's just straight out of the box, pretty much how I would recommend it. Now, if we go over to LG, this is something I wish LG would change, or I wish they would like add an additional game mode thing. So like with the Samsung, I'll show you in a moment, we can just switch it to original, and then that pretty much gets most of the stuff right, except you do lose HIG. So Samsung could still work on that, but it would be nice if LG had like a couple different game modes, one kind of like what they do here for the people that like this, and then one that's actually accurate. So as we can see, as we go down, dynamic tone mapping is on by default. I'm going to put it in HGIG right now, but I don't recommend HGIG for this game, and I'll show you why in a moment. See, everything else here under brightness is fine. If we go to color, this is where the big problem is for LG, in my opinion, is they put it on 0, and it should be warm 50. So as we do that, now we can see those two changes looks a lot better. So it's really simple to mode into a good place, but it still would be nice if it just was like this out of the box. So we'll leave that one alone for a moment. I do see a super chat. Thank you, Alex. Have I heard any news about an update for the A95L? Are they aware of the pink and green issue and Dolby Vision EOTF? Yes, they are aware of everything, but they cannot, you know, say, okay, we're going to release a fix with an update on this date or that date, or, you know, whatever, or even if they're going to fix anything at all. There's a lot of stuff they have to figure out, because it is going to affect picture quality, which can affect calibrations potentially, depending how they're done. They have to probably work with MediaTek, maybe Google. Like, there's so many different things to it. Honestly, I don't expect anything to change. I expect them to release updates to bring the features that were promised for the TV, and then that's it. Basically reminds me of the X900H, which a lot of people remember, had problems for years, had, you know, promised features for like 2 years before they came out, and then it was kind of forgotten about. That's kind of what I'm expecting. It's been 7, almost 8 months now since it came out. Haven't really been updates. Sony is not one to release updates quickly. If there is any fixes, I wouldn't expect them anytime soon. So that is something we will be discussing further throughout this video. There is a laundry list of small issues with the A95L. The problem is, you know, if 2, 3, 4, 5 of those issues affect you, that really adds up. So regardless of how good the TV actually is, that can be a problem for, you know, a lot of people. Again, depending on which issues bother you. All right, now on the Samsung, if you hold down the play pause, you bring up this menu. You can see standard is grayed out. That's because the game HDR is on. So there's a couple of interesting things with the S95D. So let me just turn this off for a moment. Go back to this menu. Why it is in RPG, I have no idea. It should either be standard or original, unless it's trying to auto-detect the game, but this is not an RPG, so that would be auto-detecting incorrectly. Anyway, so standard is generally what it's in. That's going to be way oversaturated. Other issues, if you go to original, that usually gets the color a lot better. The problem with original is then if we go back to game HDR, which is HDIG, essentially, put that back on basic. And now you can see it just switches it back to standard. There's no way to have original with game HDR. That would be something that would be nice because original does have better color accuracy. So now if I go to picture, you're going to see on the S95D, for some reason, brightness defaults to 40 in HDR. Sharpness also defaults to 10, which I don't like, so I'm going to turn that down. As far as the brightness, whether it should be 40 or 50, I'm going to put it at 50. There's really not too much visual difference in the brightness, actually, between 40 and 50, but go ahead and put it at 50. And these are not calibrated. They haven't even really been measured yet or anything. This is just showing, basic things you can adjust out of the box. I will have a future, probably do a video instead of a stream after calibration comparing them. You can see color space is on native when it's in the standard preset. So, if you go to auto in game mode, it's going to default to P3. If you go to auto outside of game mode and you're in Filmmaker or Movie, it'll actually default to 2020. If you put it into 2020 manually in game mode, it's going to be very oversaturated and you need to reduce color, do a whole bunch of stuff. We're not going to mess with that right now. So I'm just going to put it, again, just kind of like very basic, simple adjustments. I know like the EOTF is going to be over tracking as it is, so should reduce the ST2084, but that'll again be for the calibrated comparison later. This is really just like out of the box, very simple adjustment type comparison here. So again, in the standard mode, the Samsung is going to oversaturate color. And with the way the LG with HDIG in this game is, we're going to lose, it's going to clip quite a bit. Let me check any comments here, anything. Alright, don't see any questions. Okay. I got a black screen. Hold on. And if you're curious, the Xbox going to the Samsung is... Okay, I guess the Xbox just restarted. But anyway, it's connected direct. It's not through any kind of splitter or whatever. The other Xbox is connected to the receiver. Which is going to the LG and the Sony. Another issue with the Sony is if you want Dolby Vision game mode and you're going through a receiver or soundbar, let's say it's a Denon receiver, that won't work. It won't detect the EDID correctly. If it's a Marantz or if it's a, any number of other types of receivers or brands or soundbars, if you're running through something, found that work is the excuse me, the Onkyo and Pioneer, because they're basically the same things, and then the Sony receivers and Sony soundbars. If you have those, you should be good. But again, that's another one of the issues with the Sony is the EDID complications. The Sony also has a problem detecting the HDR flags correctly. So you can be watching a show let's say the show should be all in Dolby Vision. Like every episode is supposed to be Dolby Vision. You can be watching it and say the first episode it'll detect and it'll be in Dolby Vision. Then you get to episode 2 and it won't detect, it'll be in SDR. And then you get to episode 3 and maybe it'll detect HDR10 instead of Dolby Vision. So that's the problem with the Sony that needs to be fixed, is it should be able to read HDR flags correctly and it doesn't. Yeah, we'll be moving to Spears and Munzel here shortly. I just want to show a couple things here with the this game in particular, and then we'll maybe switch to like Destiny or something. I only have a few games that I can put on both. All right, so that's roughly about the same right there. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is turn the camera down. So we can look at those like neon color signs, right? Again, remember the Samsung is going to be oversaturated. It's not calibrated, but what I can do on the LG, because again, this game is not HDIG, it does not use system level setting, it doesn't have a slider, so it's going to default to the 4000 nits. So this is what I wanted to show as an example, where if you go to off, can you see the color change? Yeah, you should be able to see how it goes from like orangish to bright yellow. But then if I go to professional, and then you go down to 4000, if you were to turn this down to 10, and then turn it off, you'll see that off is 10. Like 10 equals what off is out of the box. But if you turn this up, and close the menu, now you get a little more brightness and vibrancy and whatnot out of the color. And if I look up at the sun, you can see the S95D is the brightest, most vibrant. Again, it's not really accurate at the moment, but still, if that's what you're looking for, that would be the S95D. The G4 is very close, and the A95L, this is where it falls behind. It's not only less bright, it's also losing some detail, and I don't know how well you can tell, but the circle, like white area of the sun is like an egg shape on the A95L. So this is one of the things with gaming that I'm not a fan of Sony's tone mapping. But now if I go back here and we're to switch this back to HDIG, you'll see how you lose a lot of that clipping, and this game is sending, it's not sending metadata, so the TV is, if you go to off, going to use 4000 nits. And then again, if we turn this off, then it gets really flat and is tone mapping a lot. So that's why I think if you're going to play a game like this that doesn't have any kind of HDR settings or doesn't use system level calibration or anything, play around with the 4000 nit slider, but I think 100 is probably going to be what you're going to want to use for most of you. It's kind of subjective, but that's what I would use. Because there is still some tone mapping, but it is definitely a lot brighter, more impactful, and like I said, it looks closer to what the Samsung is doing. And the Samsung, this is with the game HDR on basic. If I switch it to original without the game HDR on, let's see. It's still bright, it just loses a bit of the color and the vibrancy, but it's a little more faded. And then if you were to be out of game HDR and use standard, then you just get the oversaturation with the more like flat look anyway, so it's kind of pointless to do that, really. Original, I strongly recommend for SDR games. But generally with the Samsung, you can just put it on Game HDR Basic. There are some other settings in here that I'll recommend later changing, but even if you were to just do that, it's not bad. And then with the Sony, there's really nothing you can do to it. It's already in its accurate state. Let's say you were to turn off, which is going to brighten it up, but it really washes it out. And if you go to brightness, it's kind of the same. It's just going to overtrack and not be right. So Daniel, thank you for the super chat. If I go for the G4 and crank up the color some, will it close enough to QD OLED? That's my only concern, like color pop. No, that does not work that way. QD OLED is still going to have a native panel color advantage. The thing is, tone mapping plays greatly into the way the color comes across in bright areas, as we can see here. So it really depends scene to scene and content to content, movie to movie, what you're watching, and it becomes a really blurred line of, is it the way that they're tone mapping, or is it the color difference between the panel tech? It's really hard to actually find content that you can say for certain is, QD OLED showing a color advantage, depending on the way that it's set up and its tone mapping. So. And basically anything that's 1000 nits and under, you playing with the 1000 nit slider on the G4, you see like no difference. It basically doesn't really need tone mapping. None of these really do at 1000 nits. The Sony will still tone map no matter what. It just ignores metadata and does what it wants to do, and will clip highlights at 1000 nits. Again, another thing I'm not a fan of with Sony's tone mapping. So now what I want to do is we're going to close out of this on this one. I'm going to turn on Dolby Vision gaming and show you why I don't recommend Dolby Vision gaming. Let me turn that away. So again, luckily I have an Unkia receiver which is able to work with Dolby Vision gaming on the Sony. If it were a Denon like I had before, it would not work. Okay, so now I want to go through the settings real quick on the Sony. Again, this is Dolby Vision Game. It actually defaults with this off. This is going to be way over brightened. And so I'm going to put on Gradation Preferred. Kind of helps it, but it's still over brightened. And you should already pretty much be able to tell how way oversaturated the Sony is in Dolby Vision Game mode. Like, look at the red health bar compared to the Samsung, which we know the Samsung is already oversaturated, but like, and then the neon colors on the Sony are, again, definitely way overdoing it. So right about there. I don't recommend Dolby Vision gaming on the Sony, and I don't on the LG either. On the LG with Dolby Vision gaming, there's really nothing you can do to help it either. Maybe with, gonna have to see if you can calibrate it to get it to fix the OTF, but Dolby Vision game mode on the LG is basically the same as Cinema Home. Like if I go to Cinema Home, there's no difference. It is Cinema Home, so that's just the way it is. Whereas Filmmaker is, you can now see what it should look like. So that's the difference there. That's how overly brightened, which causes it to flatten out. And then if I put it here, you can also see how overly brightened and oversaturated the A95L is. Now if I look back up at the sun, get that. So again, now you can see the S95D still brightest, most vibrant. The Sony, very oversaturated, and the LG is just kind of more of a washed out look while also still being bright, but that's just because the EOTF is so lifted. So yeah, this is again where I wish Dolby Vision game mode on the LG would just be accurate, but it's not, or if they would just add another mode that's going to be accurate out of the box. Because if there were an accurate Dolby Vision game mode, it actually would be beneficial, especially for games like this that don't have sliders, and it would defeat the need for any HDR sliders or anything. Like, it would just take all the guesswork out of it. Alright, so I'm disabling Dolby Vision and switching to Destiny 2. All of the TVs have the latest firmware updates. Actually, I think the G4 just got a new one. Let me see if it did the update or not. It should have. Auto updates is on, so I'll double check, but it should have updated. 31027. Yeah, everything's up to date. Yeah, now for Destiny, I'm definitely going to switch HGIG back on. Now on camera, it might look like the G4 is crushing some of the darker areas a bit. Just keep in mind that, especially in game mode, the Samsung's going to be too bright near the bottom end, so it's overly brightening the shadows. And then the Sony is pretty much just always over brightening shadows. Like, they are too bright near black. Let me see if I can tighten up the sharpness on the camera or the focus without it adding moire from the camera. Alright, so I got the focus a little tighter. If you see any moire or, like, colored lines going across the screens, like in a grid pattern, let me know if I don't catch it. Crap. I made a new account for the other Xbox and forgot I haven't gotten the tower yet for that account. Let's go here, I guess. Should be able to go here. Okay. Alright, so with the S95D with Game HDR on basic, it clips at 1400. Again, this is out of the box. I gotta measure and see where the optimal point for contrast is, or just calibrate it without it, but for right now, the HDIG clipping point is 1400 on it and 15 on these. Well, the Sony is more complicated, but normally would put it like 16, but it's close enough at 15. The S95D actually does go up to like 1700 or so, but the way that it is out of the box is it clips at 1400. And that's probably because of the contrast setting. Now these, because I am using two Xboxes and then a Fireteam, should be able to see that the clouds are like a couple seconds apart. So it's not exactly frame for frame the same, but it should be relatively close. The G4 and the S95D basically the same. The A95L is actually pretty much about the same here for that as well. Alright, any comments? The light is important to have on, again, for the camera exposure, because if I turn off that and then it's just trying to expose off of the TVs, it actually makes it harder to try and get a better exposure when trying to get dark areas and bright areas, kind of like this. It also gives a frame of reference of how bright something is on the TV compared to something else that is a static brightness. Alright, now everyone hopefully understands that the camera is going to make the QD OLEDs look a little bit more like magenta reddish, and the LG a little more bluish greenish. In person, the G4 and the S95D right now are pretty darn close looking at the sky. A little bit more, I don't know, kind of pinkish than those two, but it's actually not doing too bad on the camera. It's just making the LG look a little more blue than it really is, and the Samsung a little more blue than it is. Alright, and the timing of the movement in those clouds is actually pretty close now. Look at something else. Actually, while I'm down here, let me see if I can see gradients and banding. Yeah, so I can see posterization on the LG. Do you see those like wavy color lines out there in the sky? Maybe if I turn up the exposure, it might help. Alright, let me know if that's coming across on the screen. If you look at the sky, do you see the like kind of wavy-ish lines? Whereas on the Sony, there's basically none, but remember that smooth gradation is turned on low on the Sony. That's how it is out of the box. If I were to turn that off, it would still be a little smoother than the LG, but there would be some. And then on the Samsung, I don't have something with the same scope on this account, but the Samsung also showing some minor posterization, but again, it's a little better than the LG. I mean, I would say the Samsung's at the point that it's low enough posterization that it's a non-issue. The Sony, it's a non-issue with smooth gradation on low, and if it were off, it would be about the same as the Samsung. And then on LG, at least in this particular spot, it's not that bad, but I know if I were at the tower, I would see it a lot more. And that is like the main remaining thing I wish LG would fix, is the posterization in the sky. Let me see if I can find a different area to see it better. Okay, there. Yeah, right there. I can see it quite a bit. Yeah, definitely here you can see the magenta clouds on the A95L. That is from the camera, that's not in person. And then also the LG clouds are looking like bluish green. They're not, they're actually really white. The Samsung, it's also adding a bit of magenta to the clouds that's not there. You should be able to see how the Sony making those darker areas a little bit brighter than the LG. Let's get the Samsung over to that spot. I can't get it lined up exactly the same, but it's pretty close. Nope, I don't want the flashlight on. Okay, so yeah, you can really see the Sony over brightening. Let me crank this up. So you see that dark beam? It's really over brightened on the Sony. It's a little over brightened on the Samsung, and it's darker looking on the LG, but the LG I know isn't going to lift shadows. It might be slightly crushed, but I'll measure it and then let you know after calibration. But from everything I've seen so far out of the box, the G4 isn't really crushing. It's just the closest to what it should be. The Sony does not do 144 hertz. That is the Samsung and LG that do that. Haven't had any issues with 144 hertz with, HDR, VRR, everything on. It's all fine on both of them. Oh, what? When did it get moved to storage? This should move pretty quickly. That is VRR flicker that you are seeing. That is very common. That's all displays pretty much that do VRR have VRR flicker. There is this new narrative that seems to suggest that it's only an OLED thing. It is not. All LCDs with VRR also have VRR flicker. I think many of you probably know the outlet that is really pushing the narrative that OLEDs have VRR flicker and LCDs don't, but that's not true. LCDs have VRR flicker as well, and Sea of Thieves is a prime example of a game that really shows it when you're loading it up. Alright, there. Now do you see, as it gets darker, that flickering on the Samsung? That's the VRR flicker. And what that's caused by, you can actually see if you pull up this and look at the frame rate. When the frame rate drops a lot is when you will see that flickering. Additional requirements. What was this? Okay. Again, this is a new account, so I gotta try to get through this. Whatever. Yeah, you'll see as the frame rate is flickering or changing at the bottom, that's where the flicker comes in. Like to receive occasional emails? No. Close. I don't want to play Maiden Voyage, I just want to play... Alright, hopefully I'll just be able to join the other account and skip doing the tutorial. As soon as that's done transferring. No, it's not a only game comparison. I will be switching off of gaming shortly. Just want to... Sea of Thieves is a really good spot for checking low luminance posterization issues on the LG. So I want to check that. And then probably flip over to Fortnite for just a few moments to show SDR brightness. And then we'll switch to Spears and Munzel. And I have two different 4K Blu-ray players with two different copies of Spears and Munzel. So I will be playing the Samsung in HDR10 Plus, and then the LG and the Sony in Dolby Vision. Then I also have two Apple TVs back here, so I can do the same for streaming content, HDR10 Plus for the Samsung, and Dolby for the other two. As for the S95D, oh my god, really? You need an update? I just updated this. Alright, as for the S95D, with its reflective, or anti-reflective, well, it's so-called anti-glare coating that causes more glare when light hits it directly. I've already, shown that before, so I'm not really going to dive into that. This is putting the coating entirely to the side. Just assume that if the S95D's coating works in your environment and it's not an issue, then that's the kind of comparison we're doing here today. All right. If the chat can, let's not argue about things too much here. I'm not really monitoring the chat that well. If any of the mods see anything, let me know. I'm going to put that up so as it loads in, we can see if the frame rate drops and see the VRR flicker on all 3 displays. Again, you know, anything that is said to separate any of these displays is very small things, but the small things do matter, so that's why they are brought up. Generally speaking, any of the premium or flagship OLED models, they're all so good that any person should be, you know, plenty happy to have any of them. I always say, worry about, you know, issues that could bug you. Hang on, I just kind of interrupted myself there because I was actually surprised the G4 has so little VRR flicker showing up compared to the other 2 right there. Normally it's about the same, but so anyway, all the displays are basically excellent, and I would recommend you try to figure out what are some of the drawbacks to each display and decide what you want based on that, because for me, I would rather not have distractions because the majority of what people watch really isn't pushing the HDR envelopes. And just so in day-to-day normal general use, you know, if there's motion issues, if there's, you know, processing issues, things, any number of things, if your HDMI ports aren't working correctly, and again, another issue with the A95L, where sometimes it will just forget what everything is, and then you can't find your devices. Things like that can get very annoying. Alright, so looking at this little candle is last year on the G3 was really bad. Which table? This table. Alright, so let's... I do have a short on my channel showing the posterization that the G3 had when doing this. I can see that it is still there on the G4, but it's actually not bad. It's about the same as the A95L. The A95L has a... You can see the banding and posterization rings in the middle. The G4 looks very close to it. The S95D does have some rings that are supposed to be there because it is a change in luminance, but it's definitely smoother and there's not really a color shift through them, so it's less... There's... Again, when it comes to distractions, I would say the S95D is the least distracting with its handling of posterization issues. Let me turn that down. Maybe you can get a little better view of it that way. That makes it look worse than it is, though. So let's go something like that. You know, I can definitely tell though that the Samsung is a different luminance level. It's definitely brightening more. The G4 is darker. Even the A95L is looking a little darker than the S95D for that table. But this is the A95L. That pink and green posterization does carry over into game mode. You can see it here. I think you can see, I guess looking at the camera or the footage, I don't really see so much the pink and green. I just see the movement of the ringing. But in person, you can see green in some of those rings. The G4, it's more of like different shading of gray for each ring. But definitely do see the actually the smooth gradation on the A95L might actually be making this a little worse. Let me see. That's one thing with smooth gradation, having it on. It's not just fine details that you can lose with it on. It does cause near black performance to get worse. It can cause flickering in dark scenes. And yeah, you actually get more noticeable ringing or circles here with it on low than you do if it's off. So it's like if you have bright posterization in the sky, smooth gradation low can help. If you have more low luminance posterization, smooth gradation is going to make it worse. Now I would say the Sony and the Samsung are pretty close, with the LG being, again, it's not bad. It's definitely a heck of a lot better than the G3. Again, you can go watch my short on the G3 I did last year. I'd say it's really a non-issue on all three of these. Alright, now let's look at the Fireplace. Settings, HDR. Now, this is another prime example that I use of a game, because I know that there's some people who like to, on the G3 anyway, would use filmmaker mode and then turn on dynamic tone mapping and set games to 4000 nits and do all these things to try and get the color brightness. And, you know, if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But it's not what I recommend, and I can show you here why. So here's with each one set how they pretty much should be. See, the G4 and the A95L are, the color of the fire is like a perfect match, essentially. The Samsung is definitely making the fire a brighter, like yellowish, less red. But if you were to put this game to 4000 nits, this is a game that's going to see, you can see the entire image raises. So a lot of tie their APL to the HDR brightness, so now everything around this fireplace is way too bright. There's like no shadows anymore. Everything's over brightened. So that's why I do not recommend doing that. If professional, again, the 4000, if I turn this all the way down to 10, it's going to be the same as off. But if I put this up to 100, now it looks like the S95D and the A95L is the only one that's like really red. Oh, you lost me? Okay, yeah, I guess. Man, I changed all my Ethernet cables and everything back here. How long was I gone, and how much did you miss? Did you lose me for, oh, just a second? Okay. Yeah, just making sure I don't have to, like, repeat a bunch of stuff. But yeah, so just if you did miss that part, putting it on the professional and setting the 4000 slider to 100 gets the color of the fire more like the Samsung. The Samsung is still brighter here. This is definitely an example where you can definitely tell it's brighter, but it is also clipping a little more. So it's a combination of the two, and then also the oversaturation of the color from not being calibrated, and again, so on and so on and so on. But for just average person buying one of these, perception is the Samsung's going to be brighter fire, looks more like fire. The A95L, I would say, is the weakest here. The camera, I would have to turn the ISO down even more to show the red. Let's see. There, that's as low as I can get it. Now you can see more of the color difference I'm talking about here. Yeah, my connection on OBS is 5 green bars, says 4200 kilobits a second. It dropped frames are low. Okay, now it just turned red. That is weird. I don't know what is going on with that. Yeah, I'm here. If you can you hear me? Because it did drop red for a split second. I don't know why it's doing that. Now it's 5 green bars again. The internet is good. I just don't know why. There's got to be some kind of connection problem somewhere in a line. Because I replaced all my Ethernet cables literally to every device in the house. Yeah, so you can see, anyway, we go back to HDIG on the LG. It's more of just like the red without the orange and yellow. Kind of like the Sony. And then with professional set to 100, you get more of the yellow like the Samsung. And then if you turn this down, it's the same thing as just off without the professional. Like, I never have any pauses or hiccups or issues when I'm streaming content or anything, so I don't know what that problem could be. Where is the sun at? Why is it? I think you could see the posterization in the sky right now on both the Sony and the LG. Let me get the Samsung over there. I just got turned around. There I am. Okay, here comes the sun out. Alright, so if I stand like this and look about right there and look up. Okay. So, yeah, you can see the color banding on all three, actually. Again, the Samsung, not quite as bad. Again, this is with the Sony with the smooth gradation turned off now. Sun is definitely the brightest on the Samsung, with the A95L the least bright of the three, but still bright. But I do need to check and see why it defaults to 40 brightness on the Samsung. I gotta see if it's over-tracking EOTF if you put it to 50. Because if I put it to 40, it's about the same brightness as the G4. Putting it to 50 definitely gets a bit brighter. But I'll have to check again with the measurements and after the calibration and see what changes. Also, I think the field of view is different here. Hold on. Settings. Video settings. Graphic settings. Field of view. There we go. So now the sun's the same size, at least. Or about the same. Alright, let me switch over to... So I'll probably go to Fortnite for SDR. Smooth gradation on LG does not work in game mode, even if it shows that it's available. You can toggle it on, but it does not work. It doesn't do anything. So, no. Outside of game mode, it works. Yeah, I have to say the Samsung has the least noticeable of the posterization above the sun right now. The Sony is probably second, and then the LG has the most noticeable, but again, it's visible there if you're looking for it. And I think they're better than like prior years, especially the G3. The G3 had it really bad. So I think it's kind of again, it's there, you can see it, but it's not a super distracting issue like it's been in past years. Alright, so this is SDR game. Let me just put all three of them. Oh, come on. It's a free game. At least on the LG and the Sony, they look pretty much the same at max SDR brightness. Like, the difference is very small. Oh, come on. Nope, not yet. So stupid you have to do this in the store and just to be able to play a free game. Hang on, let me relaunch it, see if I can get this cutscene to play on both. Alright, so on the Samsung for SDR game mode, really it's defaulting to FPS, so yeah, I guess it is trying to auto detect the type of game that you're playing. And I strongly recommend using original for SDR game mode on the Samsung. Come on, come back up. Alright, so once you're in original, the only thing really to do is turn contrast down to 38. And then I'm just going to make sure, let's see, I'll turn this back to default. And brightness is on high. Okay, so this is where the S95D expected is going to be the brightest in SDR gaming. Again, I think it's too bright, personally. I don't know any reason to really need that much SDR brightness, but some people like that. I don't want... Okay, play. Oh my god, do I really have to do all this? Alright, whatever. Is there a way to re-watch this from the menu, maybe? Okay. God, this has changed so much since I've actually played this last. Okay. What was that? Aha. So, let me, I think I can probably get that to play again if I time it right. Let's see. Nope, it's gone. Damn it. It used to go into one where it's just private, and I can't actually... Where is the custom game mode setting? I don't know, whatever. Anyway, here's just the screen. That should be good enough to see the brightness in SDR. Again, the Samsung's a little brighter, the Sony and the LG are about the same. And then the Sony will dim down over time. It's gotten better than past Sony's, but it is still a thing. You know, especially if there's more HUD area in a game like Fortnite, which has a large HUD, the Sony will dim over time. Alright, let's call it on gaming. Not the device I wanted. I don't know. Alright, this is another issue. Is the Samsung is calling the Blu-ray player and the Xbox an Xbox. So I'm trying to find which one isn't the Xbox. That's an Xbox. Come on. So, this one? It should be this one. Now the Sony is flickering. That's from the camera. The Sony will refresh 24 FPS at 96, whereas the other two do 120. If you have a Panasonic UB820 or 9000, and you have not updated to the latest, because it does make it where if your TV is over 1000 nits and you go to Dolby Vision, it'll default to player LED instead of TV LED, which you don't want. On the Sony, it's in Dolby Dark. The only thing I did was turn on Gradation Preferred. If you go to off, it's over brightened. Everything else is off. Reality Creation off. All motion settings are off. LG, Filmmaker, Dolby Vision. Everything's off. And off, okay. AI service is off. Energy saving really only affects SDR anyway, but that's off. OLED care, it's all off. Let's see if I can find a shutter speed that won't flicker on the Sony. Alright, I don't see any flicker on any of the displays at the moment. If you see any flicker during, just let me know. Alright, did I miss any comments? I guess I dropped out at some point again. Okay. Alright, now the timing on this is going to be interesting because the Panasonic player is so slow. So I need to hit the Panasonic first and then the other one, and let's see. So let's see if I got that right. Nope. All right. Okay, we're off by a few frames, but the Sony has such high input lag, it's going to be off by a few frames as well. During that opening right there, I imagine you probably just saw all that posterization on the A95L. That is actually there. That's, again, one of the issues with the A95L. The A95L and the G4 in person, the white looks almost identical. The Samsung is a little more blue. On camera, they don't look that way. So, like, especially here, it's making the LG look very bluish green. That is not the case. That is the camera. That's one of the problems with doing a live stream with one camera for two display technologies. So it is going to make the color differences a little hard to see. But you can't. Let me start pausing. Back one. Back. Guess we can just pause it and do it this way. Why did that start playing? So if I turn this down, you can see the white cloud. The Sony is clipping. Again, this is in Dolby Vision. But with the Sony, you have to turn on its own tone mapping in Dolby Vision to get it to track EOTF correctly. The LG has the brightest point of that cloud. The Samsung is tone mapping more aggressively, so it's not as bright. So again, here the G4 is the brightest by a little bit, but it's slightly brighter. Here you can see the S95D is losing the color in the sky. That's from the, again, this is an HDR 10 Plus, so it's tone mapping the way that The display wants to with HDR10 plus. The Sony on the camera is showing like more saturation that's not actually there. It's just the G4 is a little bit brighter. Again, the G4 gets the clouds. Looks like I dipped right there. I don't know if you got to hear what I just said, so I will repeat it. In higher APL scenes like this, the Samsung is tone mapping more aggressively, so it's losing some of its brightness and saturation. Later on, when we're in the lower APL but smaller bright objects, is where we see the S95D get a little bit brighter. This is another one with the G4 being brighter. Again, it's really kind of hard to tell because the camera is making it look too blue, and it's not. So you have different white balances I can change it to, but it's just, again, making the QD OLEDs look warmer. There's nothing you can do about that. Something that's very in common, again, the camera will not show this. The camera is going to show the A95L with this grass being very, like, orange, and it's not. It's actually the same, like, yellowish green as the G4. The color between the G4 and the A95L is almost identical. It's the Samsung that's losing a lot of saturation, looking a little more washed out, again, from the way that it's tone mapping. Here, let me turn this down. See the sun. So the sun on the Samsung is actually pretty flat. The A95L is the brightest with most color. The G4 is a very similar color, slightly less bright. So that's an area where, you know, it's probably the panel differences. This one, they pretty much all look about the same except the darker areas will lift it on. As far as gradients in the sky, Um, they're all pretty similar. So here's one where the camera is making the Sony look way oversaturated, and it's not. This is where it would need an additional camera. Um, the G4 is coming across kind of close to what it is. The Sony looks basically identical to the G4, and then the least amount of color and the most kind of washed out looking. Come on. If you look at the upper right, there's definitely more like of a bright yellow on the Sony and the LG. Again, they look essentially identical, whereas that's pretty much completely like flattened and grayed out on the Samsung. Saying chat disconnected again. Let me know if you can hear me. This is getting frustrating. With this one, they all look essentially the same. Now this one is an interesting one, as I'll explain in a moment. Let me get them all about the same right here. Play. And pause. Okay. So this is one where the front of this is BT 2020. Last year on LG, this cactus was essentially orange and stood out like a sore thumb. And if you switch the Samsung between P3 and 2020, you could also see like that difference. Whereas the Sony, represents it pretty well. So now that the S95D defaults to 2020 and is in a better, more accurate state out of the box, it actually closely matches the A95L. But so does the LG, even though the G4 doesn't go beyond P3, and this is a BT 2020 color on the front of this cactus. There's almost no distinction, no visible difference between all three of these. They all look the same. Oh, dang, I hit the wrong button. Hopefully it picks up. Okay. No, why did you go back here? Almost there. There we go. Yeah. So this is one of the ones where it's not a high APL scene. But you can definitely see the Samsung gets brighter. So as the bright area is a smaller area, then the S95D becomes the brightest. If it's a larger, higher APL area, the entire screen will tone map more aggressively on Samsung, whereas on the Sony and the LG, I know Sony just targets highlights specifically. I don't know if they do it on a per pixel level. On the LG, I know they said this year that's the thing that with the new processor, it was going to do per pixel tone mapping. We assumed that was with dynamic tone mapping on, but it seems or appears to be doing it with dynamic tone mapping off. So that's the big new thing that I've noticed with LG's tone mapping, is that it really can target very specific highlights and not pull down the APL of the whole scene, whereas Samsung is still changing the entire image when it tone maps. Alright, so on this one, the G4 has the most vibrant and saturated yellow on the body of the butterfly, especially in the bottom, like, couple areas. The Sony, I would say, is second. It's about the same saturation level, just not as bright. And then the Samsung is decently bright, but it's losing the saturation there. Come on, pause. as close as I can get it. So this is another one where those flowers go beyond P3 into BT 2020. And again, another one where visually you could not tell, like they all look the same. Yeah, like they just all three look more or less the same. Like it. Yeah, well, KG, one of the problems is one of the players, in order to fit it, I had to put it facing backwards down there under the entertainment stand. So I'm trying to get the remote to hit the right angle to pause and skip scenes or whatever when it's facing the wrong direction. So it's like a very specific spot the remote has to be in order to hit it. So this is another area where the Samsung can push the brightness on that highlight on the clock noticeably higher than the other two. Let's see. I'm just trying to catch up a little bit here on the chat. Yeah, SD, I was talking about the XR90 and the other XR models earlier. Yeah, that's the other thing that I forgot to mention is that Sony will source their panels. Generally, in the past, it's been the 85-inch comes from AUO, and then the 65 and 75 or 55 comes from CSOT, which is TCL. So like an XR90 in the 75 and lower is looking to be a CSOT panel, which is going to have blue blooming, whereas the 85 would have, still blooming, but more grayish color blooming. And again, when it's a small area, the Samsung harder. I don't know if the camera can even easily adjust for it, but yeah, the Samsung's brighter with the smaller objects. The G4 is brighter with the higher APL. The A95L kind of looks like the G4 almost all the time, except where the tone mapping isn't doing so well, and it either clips or is darker. That's kind of the general consensus here, that G4 and S95D, I would say, are more often trading blows depending on the scene and what's happening, and the Sony is either like right there with them or slightly behind. This is one where the Samsung can higher APL scene, more aggressive tone mapping across the whole scene. So these fans are brighter, kind of stand out most on the G4. especially here, that little highlight of the sun reflecting off the top. This is again where G4 is brighter. The A95L still has that like little bit of sun impact hitting the top of the fan. It's just not as bright as the G4. And then the Samsung is, you can tell, it's just tone mapping the whole scene and making it a little bit dimmer. Again, same thing, higher APL, sun behind the fan is brighter, or the windmill, whatever, brighter on the G4, a little bit closer on the A95L, but still not as bright. S95D, more aggressive tone mapping. Okay, that's as close as I can get those ones. So this is what I was talking about earlier, and how the tone mapping is going to affect the overall just look and sharpness and detail. So the G4 is not suppressing the whole scene. The A95L really isn't either. It's just the G4 is brighter, but the rock on the left, definitely brightest on the G4, not as bright on the S95D, so that's going to reduce the overall contrast. Contrast is a major, influence on how detailed or sharp something looks. So this is where, when it's a higher APL scene, Samsung's tone mapping the whole scene more aggressively, it's going to lose some of that depth and look to it. Again, the A95L is pretty close to the G4, again, just not as bright on that, especially on the rock on the left. There's a bit of a saturation loss on the S95D as well, which also adds to that difference in the look. But with this, then the S95D is brighter in the eye, any of the highlights, the white reflection off the pupil of the eye. You can see the Sony is definitely the dimmest of the three here now. So again, it just really depends on the scene of how much area is bright and just how the tone mapping is reacting. And with HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision on The LG and the Sony. Again, and also a reminder that this is just out of the box, most accurate modes. After calibration, I'll do an actual dedicated video, not a stream. And then that way I can record with different white balance on the camera to get rid of some of the color look difference that the camera causes when streaming. So here, the beak, brightest on the S95D, smaller object. This is where the S95D really shows that its panel is just capable of brighter small highlights like that. They actually all look pretty much about the same on this one. This one isn't exactly challenging for them anymore. The frog, again, they all look about the same. The green on the LG might be a little more saturated. It's closer to the A95L. The Samsung is a little less saturated. Brightness-wise, like the little bit of white around the nose or snout or whatever you would call it, brighter on the Samsung. Again, those small little highlights are brightest on the S95D. wonder if the batteries are getting bad in this remote. This is going to be kind of pointless to show on camera because the camera is going to tint the displays. But if you were in person, just about all of the skin tones on the G4 looks like they just used the A95L as a matching point and just matched everything. Like the color and everything on the G4 and A95L is extremely similar. The white in the background does not look anything like the camera is showing. And then the Samsung is just slightly less saturated than the other two. So now I know I have 2 copies of 1917. If I can find them real quick, then I can use those because 1917 supports both Dolby and HDR10+. So just give me a moment while I try to find those. Started boxing up my movies. Gotta find which box they are in. There's one copy of it. There's the other. Okay. So I know of one particular spot in this movie, especially that in HDR10, the Samsung has an advantage, but we will see about with Dolby. All right. Alright, let me cap the camera for a moment while I get it set up. Where did I put the lens cap? So the A95L does still have the flicker and Dolby Vision when you're when you get like a black screen. Hold on. That greenish dark screen that flickers. Brief cover up. We are pretty close on the timestamp. I can already see the pink and green on the A95L. This is with a disc. And then so watch around that fire and the posterization. Let me see if I can pause it. That's pretty close. So in HDR10, the LG will have a lot of noticeable posterization in this scene. The A95L probably even a little bit worse. The Samsung's very clean. In Dolby Vision, though, pretty much all the posterization goes away on the G4. So Dolby Vision is a good advantage. It helps out with the G4. Dolby Vision or HDR10 has the issues on the A95L. And then, again, the Samsung doesn't really have any posterization in low luminance scenes. Just missed it because this remote is not responding. There we go. All right, do you see all me? So this is greatly overexposed, but do you see the change in like the pink and green down there on the Sony? Like all the color and whatnot on the LG is the same. It's just, again, way overexposed. Let me get the Samsung in the same spot. A little bit further. Right about the same spot. Might be a frame off, but you can see how the Samsung and the LG pretty much look about the same here. But the Sony, just anything dark area like this. Now, when it comes to streaming, so if this was streaming this, it would look even worse. That's because of the low bitrate. I was talking with David McKenzie, who is a compressionist, and he said the reason that this kind of scene looks worse on the streaming, or through streaming on the A95L, is when they heavily compress the footage. It's going to lose a lot of like the dithering and whatnot that's implemented and mask low luminance problems when it's mastered on a disc. So this is like a best case scenario for this dark scene when it's on a disc, or if you were on, say, Kaleidoscape. But if you were streaming on the A95L, it would be even worse. So this is one of like the biggest main issues that I have with the A95L is dark scenes. They do not compete with the S95 anything. So last year, the S90C, S89C, S95C did not have any of those issues. So it's not a QD OLED thing, it's a Sony thing. Let's see, drop out again. So hopefully you got to hear everything I was saying. But anyway, again, on the LG, if it was HDR10, it wouldn't be as bad, but it would be a little bit worse than it is now. Whereas with Dolby Vision, it really cleans up any of the issues in the darker scenes, any of the posterization. See, realistically, they look kind of more like this. The LG is starting to dim from being paused too long. But on the Sony, I mean, you can really, one, because the shadows are raised, it makes it stand out more. And then two, it's just the switch from pink to green makes it very noticeable. Maybe you can see this whole scene on, like, the Sony is now green. And remember that the camera makes the Sony look more pink, so it's actually just a lot of green. This particular luminance level of what's being shown is that exact luminance level where it's just so much green. And then on the LG and the Samsung, they actually look about the same. The Samsung is slightly raised shadows, just a hair over the LG, but either one of those, you wouldn't have an issue watching this. So, you know, this is one of the reasons for me the A95L has dropped down to, like, I would say 4th or 5th place. It depends on if you count the S90C unlocked to the S95C as, you know, those two being the same model or not, whether it counts as one or two different models, essentially. But yeah, I would take either of those over the A95L. I would take a G4 or an S95D. Probably even the S90D over the A95L. Like, for me, the A95 is just keeps dropping down as new TVs come out that don't have the issues that the A95L has. Again, if you give it the right scene, the A95L will look fantastic, but so does the other two. They all look fantastic in the right scenes. Give it the more challenging stuff, and then this is where the A95L falls apart. So, and then pause. Okay. So we're 38:42. So we'll play for a few more seconds. All right. So we're at the same timestamp, but might be a couple frames off. But you can see. Obviously, I'm going to have to way overexpose so you can see it, but so if I put it about there, see how the Sony is definitely showing the most detail, but it's detail that's not supposed to be there because the Sony is overly brightened. What is the reflection from on the S95D? That's a question I have, because I don't even see that reflection in person right there. So I kind of ignore that. Again, that's just something depending on the angle, I guess, but I don't see that on the screen in person. Anyway, the Samsung is closer to the LG, which the LG is going to show the least amount of detail, but it's also not really crushing. It's just the other ones are slightly raised. We know that the Samsung has a little bit of a hump at the bottom of the EOTF. The Sony has the biggest raise in shadow detail, and it's not accurate. It's too much detail. It's showing too much. And again, the Sony looks green because of the area of luminance that it's in on the grayscale. Okay, so on here, with the explosion in the distance, they're all basically the same. Actually, like, really close. The only difference really is just the fade from the brighter area into the darker area. This isn't exactly like the brightest movie to really stress these out, though. Now, let me put a cap back on. I'm going to switch over to Apple TV. I'm not going to be streaming for too much longer because I do want to start working on a video if I have time. I have to get up very early in the morning for a calibration trip tomorrow. All right, just taking a look at the chat. Yeah, there's other names that would appreciate it if they were not mentioned around here because we just don't need to acknowledge some people. So let's just bring the talk back into what's being shown or questions about other TVs. I might have to run a different Ethernet cable to one of the Apple TV boxes. Let me see if it works. Darn it. All right, hold on a minute. Gotta fix something. Where is that one? That was that Ethernet. And this one doesn't. Here. Okay, now we're working. So this is going to be another example here. I'm actually going to turn the lights off because this is dark. So while the A95L does have good low bit rate handling in certain content, the problem is any of the dark content, which is where most of the low bitrate problems are going to be. If it's in HDR or Dolby Vision, doesn't matter. This is a problem with the A95L, so it kind of diminishes that low bitrate advantage. Now, if you're watching low bitrate SDR, it doesn't have this problem on the A95L, and then that's where it does well. But anything dark content with, again, low bitrate, it's going to make that pink and green issues dramatically worse. The flickering is from the camera. I can try to adjust the shutter speed a little bit more. I think that helped it. You can see as that fog moves, do you see how that posterization moves throughout the fog? Like this is one of the main scenes that really shows that issue. And so you can see we're still in Dolby Dark, and gradation preferred is on. Now if I go down to clarity, and we have smooth gradation turned off, if you turn it on, it really doesn't help. It actually just kind of makes some dark areas worse. Like certain dark scenes can actually get a visible flicker on the TV when using this. So I kind of recommend leaving it off, especially in Dolby. So I'm going to hit play for a couple seconds, and again, just watch as the fog is moving, how the pink and green just kind of moves and spreads. New and old, I don't mess with Anapeak on the Samsungs at all. If it's the S89C or S90C and you know it's a Gen 2 panel, you can just do the name change, so it's not like overdriving the panel in any way. It's not messing with EOTF, and then you can change it into the S95C. That way, that's about as far as I'd go. The Anapeak stuff, I'm not going to touch. And then as just in general, S95D versus G4 for gaming depends on your preference. If you want more accurate gaming, I would say G4. If you like, more oversaturated, more, vibrant or poppy or whatever type gaming, then you probably want to go with the Samsung. As far as like features and whatnot, if you want HDR10 plus for PC gaming, then that's on the Samsung. Dolby Vision gaming on the G4, I don't recommend at all anyway. So just depends on kind of which one you want. So this is where the G3, even the C4 has this problem. Any of the LGs last year, something in a dark scene with candlelight, fluctuating luminance levels in the back would cause all kinds of posterization and flickering, pulsating, and just issues. The G4 fixed that, doesn't have that problem. Again, Samsung doesn't really have any of these low luminance issues. The A95L, again, it's the pink and green and just not very good. Again, we are, almost 7 months post-release of the A95L. This hasn't been addressed. They've known about it since the very beginning, or at least like a month in or whatever. So, I honestly don't really see a fix coming, but, I can't say for sure one way or the other. Also, you can see in the red of his outfit, it's actually much more noticeable in person, because again, the camera is going to add red, but you can still somewhat see the lower saturation level. The low luminance saturation on the A95L is very apparent in this scene. Both the LG and the Samsung don't have issues with low luminance saturation. Vocon, I don't know. I've said it multiple times. The G4 out of the box, fresh out of the box, there's going to be crushing because it's a brand new panel. Post break-in, there should be no visible crushing or issues. I've answered that many a times. It's very, very close to where it should be. The Samsung models have a small lift at the bottom end. It's really not too noticeable, especially if you have any light in the room. It's not a problem. Sony lifts the bottom end too much. Definitely something that you would need to have addressed with calibration or settings. But the LG is pretty much like after you break it in where it should be, near black. Okay. So all three of them are in their default filmmaker with all motion stuff turned off. So it's not going to be pretty on this scene for any of them. However, as far as motion goes, Samsung has not changed really anything about their processing that I have seen since even the S95B 2 years ago. Same processing issues, like with the dropped or skipped frames here and there. Low bitrate handling, like dark low bitrate scenes can have flickering and stuff that hasn't changed. So I'm not really seeing anything processing wise difference with the S95D compared to prior years. A95L, when there's no added motion things at all, it's fine. I do generally think that the G4 or LG in general, when you turn all motion stuff off and you're just native 24 or 23976 motion, is slightly better on the LG, but a lot of that has to do with over sharpening artifacts on the Sony. And speaking of over sharpening, so before I had checked a ringing test pattern on the LG, even at the LG event that I went to, like they showed it, there was no ringing. Now there is. So I don't know if an update changed. The ringing present on the G4 is not as much as the Samsung or the Sony, especially the Sony. The Sony has a ton, but there is some. So something changed, and I'll cover that more when I review the TV. But let me try to hit both of these at the same time. All right, one responded slightly faster, but they're close enough. So again, this will not be pretty, especially coming across a stream at 30 FPS and whatnot, but it is what it is. Okay. So, don't know how that looked for you guys. I have a feeling this stream is going to get claimed because of this, because this is longer than 15 seconds. But now I'm going to turn the motion settings to the lowest available setting. So, and if you don't know this already, blur reduction or de-blur, whatever you call it on whatever TV, is for high frame rate only, so sports essentially. Judder or de-judder is for movies, TV shows. So it doesn't matter what blur is at, it's not going to affect this at all. As far as the G4 cinematic movement, where it will dynamically alter the amount of interpolation based on the scene, I see soap opera effect through it very easily. So if you are sensitive to soap opera effect, you won't like it. If you are someone who doesn't mind a little bit of soap opera effect, or you don't see soap opera effect, then you might like the cinematic movement. If you are someone who wanted it, like, makes it a little bit smoother for the panning shots like this one, but with a little bit less interpolation on like general talking or moving shots or whatever. That's generally what it does. For the most part, though, I recommend user selection. I will say the motion in general is considerably different on this than prior models, where like on the G3 or any older LG, D-Judder 1 to me would be unusable. It would be too much soap opera effect. Now 1 and 2 are very, very, very mild soap opera. 3 has a touch. I'd say 3 is a little too much for me, but if you're someone who doesn't mind a very small amount, then maybe that would work for you. I would say somewhere between 2 and 3 is about what the Sony is when it's on smoothness 1. And then once you go to 4, that's where you get a big jump in interpolation. Then it becomes immediately obvious. So, personally, I've been trying out 2. I might switch down to 1. This is subjective. Doesn't, for something like this, you can see it smoothing this panning shot a little bit when you are on 1 or 2, and then it's really not intrusive on other types of things. But let me put it to 1 because I do want to show the mildest or lowest setting on each one. And again, 30 FPS stream, not going to really show it very well. When it comes to motion in a review, I can record at a much higher frame rate, probably 120, with a higher shutter speed, and then put that into the video. So I might do that, but... Alright. We're pretty close on the timing here. Aside from the occasional skip on the Samsung, I would say with it at 1, it's pretty close. And then, again, I think 1 or 2 gets it pretty close on the LG to the A95L when that's on smoothness 1. So the other thing with the Sony, though, is because of, again, I mentioned earlier, the over-sharpening, which can cause ringing and artifacts. So if there's small, high-contrast objects that happen to be moving or in a panning shot, they can shimmer on the Sony. I don't see that on the Samsung or the LG. So that's not really a motion issue on the Sony. It's just more of their sharpening that's being affected by the motion. SD, I did mention earlier that the Bravia naming is more of a series, whereas the actual model numbers is XR90, XR80, XR70. I've also said, like, anyone's typing in B9 for Bravia 9, to me, it looks like they're talking about a 2019 LG OLED. Alright, now the problem with trying to show SDR out of the box is none of them are going to be luminance matched. So I'm going to have to just try to, by eye, just get the luminance close. But the idea here is to show the macro blocking. Shoot, just missed it. If I can get the pause just right. I think I did. 26. Alright, close enough. Let's see now. Alright, so I know the Sony, I can get to, working game optimizer, so let's go to filmmaker. And pixel brightness of around 8 to 10 is around 100 nits on the G4. Start with a 10. Also, if there's gamma differences, this is much better to show after calibration when the luminance is perfectly matched, but we'll get there. Actually, with it at 100 nits, it might be too hard to see on camera, but we'll see. So the S95D, I really don't know what, I haven't checked it yet, where 100 nits would be. What are we in? We're in Filmmaker. turn that way down. Turn this down to 38. Wait, ST2080. This should not be in HDR. Why is it in HDR? Hold on. Might need to change the setting on the Apple TV. Yeah, so 4K SDR. So this doesn't affect the HDR that we were seeing before. It's just the SDR. So now that we're in SDR, I have to set everything right. Okay. 26 seconds. Why did it skip a second? It went from 25 to 27. Okay. Alright, so 20, 38, 26 off, okay. So that should be close to 100 nits or so. I can see the flickering in this already. The camera is picking up the flickering on the Samsung. This is what I was talking about earlier with low bitrate dark scenes can flicker. There's nothing you can do about that on the Samsung. It's just some scenes do that. If I go to the clarity menu, if you were to turn this, like if you were to try noise reduction, it's not gonna help. It doesn't change anything, so turn that back off. And then on the Sony, brightness of 40 and peak luminance off. This should be right around 100 nits as well. If we go to clarity, again, everything here is off. Reality creation off. So now let me expose the camera a little better. So if you look on the right side of the image, again, where is that? Is that reflection from the monitor? Aha, yeah, so it's the reflection of the monitor. Anyway, you can see some macro blocking on the right side. Let me see if I can find a way to block the monitor from hitting the S95D. This is why I don't like that coating personally. What do I have? Anything? Let me turn the brightness down. Okay. Alright, so you can see a little bit of the blocking on the LG. You can see a little bit on the Sony, but there's less and it's smoother. The Samsung, you have less macro blocking visible, but you have the flicker instead. That's the trade-off. On the Sony, if you turn smooth gradation up, oops. It's actually a little bit dimmer. So if you start applying smooth gradation on the LG, the clouds basically just smooth together and disappear. All that detail. So that's if you were to go to high. Medium, you get a little bit more low, looks closer to the Sony. So if you do smooth gradation low, if that kind of stuff bothers you, it gets pretty close to what the Sony's doing. But again, there's a detail loss. Whereas if it's off, you get all the detail, you get all the grain, you get all the noise, but you get all the detail. So that's your, up to you to decide. That's your preference when you're watching stuff. It's like, yeah, the higher you set that smooth gradation, the more you lose. Did we lose the stream again for a moment there? Again, I'm going to be done here very shortly. But if you guys saw, again, smooth gradation setting, you can see as I turn it up, the clouds, or the fog just disappears along with all the grain and noise and stuff in the image. So, for the people that don't like film grain or whatever, when you remove it, you're removing other things too. So the Sony has a small amount of smooth gradation, just by default, a little bit of smoothing overall that makes it have less macro blocking visible right out of the box. But there's a small trade-off for having that. If you put the LG on low, then it's basically the same as the Sony. The Samsung doesn't give you this control. It's just a preset amount, and it causes a flicker on that one. Okay, so any questions? So probably going to be finishing up here. Again, we'll have all three of these calibrated next week, and then work on a similar video, obviously compressed down into a shorter amount of time, going through the differences once they're calibrated. There should be less differences then. Again, it's just really coming down to the processing and that kind of stuff. Which one has the motion you like? Which one, do you like little tiny highlights or smaller highlights to be brighter? Then the S95D does that well. Do you want higher APL? Let me put on. Let me go to The Witcher, I guess, or wait a minute. Let me go to. Where is just Our Planet? There it is, Our Planet. Let me go to Our Planet, and then I'll turn on the brighter mode. So movie mode with active tone mapping, and then Cinema Home on the LG, so on. The Sony doesn't really give you. They give you the brightness preferred, but it doesn't really do that much. Just for those that like this. Crap, it's in Dolby. Let me turn off Dolby. Because if the Dolby Cinema Home does not get nearly as bright as the HDR10 Cinema Home does. So let me switch that. Play for a moment. Alright, so 217. So on the Samsung, we'll go to movie mode and turn on active. Or it's already on. So 50/50, active, everything else default. On the Sony, hang on. Apple TV needs to be adjusted after turning off Dolby Vision. Okay, so on the Sony, all you can really do is put it on brightness preferred. Now on the LG, you have multiple options. So if you're in Filmmaker and you turn on dynamic tone mapping, it doesn't change a whole lot. There is a change, but it's not much. If you go to cinema mode and turn on dynamic tone mapping, then you get a lot brighter. Again, this is for content that's like 1000 nits and under. If it's higher graded content, then dynamic tone mapping can actually make it dimmer to show more detail. So you can see there's a big difference here. And then if you go to cinema home, that's basically turning the dial to 11. And this is with expression enhancer on detail, which brings the lower end down a little bit darker. But if you really want it brighter, you can go brightness. So for super bright room, or if that's just your preference, you can get more brightness out of the G4 by quite a large margin. There's no performance difference between the 65 and the 83. Screen tearing on Series X, no, haven't seen it, but I also haven't like gotten to sit down and actually play anything really. So, it's just been like turning on a game to test, whatever, not really actually playing. All right, let me skip through here to something else. All right, so was that 322? Looks good. That's a 324. Darn it, wrong button. Trying to get it on the same frame. Oh, well. Actually, let me go to a different episode. go to, I think it's the last episode. Well, last episode of season 1, anyway. Yeah, forest. This one has the fire in the forest towards the beginning. And this is in a good or a bad spot right here. So that's 225. Come on. How did it back up? All right, there you go. Let me expose there. Any thoughts on dimming differences between the sets? Dimming really isn't an issue on the LG or the Samsung. The Samsung, you can go in the service menu and disable all the dimming. LG, you kind of can, but you can't, not really. But it's not really an issue to begin with. A95L has anywhere from like not really noticeable dimming to very noticeable dimming, depending on what it is, how much static area, logo, whatever is on screen, things like that. So if you're worried about dimming, the A95L is something to be concerned about. Let me put these back in their accurate modes. And this was just if you need to push the brightness for a bright room, or that's just your preference. Again, the G4 with Cinema Home and Expression Enhancer, Dynamic Tone Mapping, all that, like you can push it considerably higher. There you go. All right. Anything else to think about or mention? Not really. It is now almost 7. I wanted to have time to work on a video. I don't know if I'll be able to now from doing this. So I'll probably leave this stream up until I work on the video comparing the 3 after calibration, and then it'll go to members only. So if you aren't a member, if you consider becoming a member, you 1, support the channel, and 2, gain access to past streams that get turned to members only. And then also you get, like if you have a question, you can leave a comment, and then YouTube will give me a notification in a certain area that separates members from the others. So you get kind of priority comment access. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions really, so I think we're going to go ahead and end. Thanks for coming by, everybody. Again, all of this was no calibration. You saw the few times that we changed a few basic settings. That was it. And then I'll do another comparison after calibration in a video. I'm not sure when the video will be out because I do have a lot of calibration trips coming up. So that's going to eat into a lot of time. But, just keep an eye out, and it'll come when it comes. And I'll have a G4 settings video very soon, and then I'll do individual review videos for each of these TVs as well. So, all right, let's stop streaming.